Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It's always a joy to have Jessie with us, and I think we're going to do a little continuation of my session with Veronica Swift and talking a little bit more about these crazy bloodlines and Order of Melchizedek and all different kinds of rituals. So I don't know where you want to start, Jessie, but let's just see where God leads us today.
Yeah, I think we started with, kind of talking about the bloodlines and how there's certain classifications that they give, and you know, they'll put people into family lines. Like as you go through things, they're going to declare these words over you that you're part of it, going back to a biblical line. So, some of those could be that they kind of rule Abel out, since Cain took his life. So that leaves you either you're going to be declared, in the order of Melchizedek.
Mhm.
And you can find this wording. I just was quoting it this morning in Initiates of the Flame. But they'll declare you, um, it says, those who follow the path of faith or the heart use water. So those who are connected to the elemental line of water
Mhm.
are going to be known as the sons of Seth. While those that follow the path of the mind and action, which is the left hand path,
Mhm.
are known as the children of Cain. Um, so they're going to begin to give you these names, and in fact, not just limited to Seth and Cain. They're going to declare if you're part of the house of David or Judah. Um, then from there, I think it, goes even sometimes some groups to Nicodemus and his household that were all saved. And then you hear, that you're a son or a daughter of, Job or Rebecca, Sarah, that gets into more of the Masonic female groups.
Mhm.
Um, Daughters of Naomi, um, and then you get further into it, like at the higher levels, they actually do, because they don't run off of the house of the fathers, like those would be considered the tribes of Israel, where you have all 12, and then Joseph's house is distinguished as both, you have Ephraim and Manasseh. So you'll be one or the other if you're part of that house of Joseph. But they do a further classification. Those are just the houses of the fathers. When you get down to it, everything runs off of the houses of the mothers, and that gets down to 4 women. So they'll classify you as, being of a daughter of Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, or Zilpah.
Mhm.
And those will each go with a cherubic sign of either, the house of the eagle, the lion, the man, or the
Mhm.
ox. So they'll begin to put you under, basically, it's your, they're not using it by your genealogy. Really, it's connecting you to a zodiac of some sort,
Okay.
to the false houses. Um, so then, it gets even further where in that only those at the top, what's considered the upper echelons of the Order of Melchizedek, well, you have to be the true seed. So guess what? They're gonna tell you that you are descended from Jesus and Mary
Yep.
Magdalene.
Yep.
So you can trace your genealogy back to that. And I have to laugh because really, honestly, and they'll put it in your genealogy.
Yeah.
Like when you track, everything will go back to that. So it looks like it's something real, but it's complete, BS. Like it's just, they're liars. They lie, big fat liars. But that can be one of the ways, like, if you're having memories and, you're questioning if you've been in the system or not, you can do that search, and if you see Mary Magdalene and Jesus pop up in your genealogy, then you know that you've been in the system.
Yeah. Well, so that was definitely confirmed, with Veronica Swift doing my genealogy and the number of kings and, all over the place, and it was interesting because 'cause I'd recently had encounter with the Lord and, healing that had to do with 10 kingdoms, and, she hadn't finished, all of my genealogy and, she had gotten to 9, and so it was
Wow.
confirmation of some things, but, at the same time, just this crazy stuff, what does it all mean and all of that, and you shared some insights just as we were getting on that was kind of interesting about, the Order of Melchizedek and what they're trading on, and so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have it's more than a theory, but with that within the Order of Melchizedek, why do they declare people under certain households? When I went through my contracts and different things, there always was a name that was declared over me. Um, Part of those, like at my highest contracts, I literally, you know, had all four names of the queens of hell declared over me, and then a fifth name. Um, but that then, why did they do that? There's no spiritual power in those names. You know, what is the purpose of it? And I think it's because each of those names goes back to financial trusts. I think that that's how they filed the different trusts in the system. So that's why, as people go through, they declare a name over you because then it puts you financially under one of those trusts, and those are the trusts that they pull money out of on your behalf. So how does the church get access to all of its money? um you know that's how they're doing it.
Mm,
Whether it's the Mormons or the Masons, the Jesuit Catholics, the Kabbalah, or the Satanists, they're pulling off those trusts. um so that's why I think that they do it. And they can have, if basically the more names or trusts you're connected to, because some of those are going to be larger, some are going to be smaller.
mhm,
But the more that you're connected to each time, they just have to decide what names are they, you know, what names were involved with that ritual or that event, and then they bill those trusts to receive money for their time and their expenditures for those rituals and those events. So
wow,
they're getting paid to do those things, and they get paid by, each individual that is involved in that. And you aren't going to have the majority of people at a ritual aren't going to know everybody who's there,
mhm,
but that's why they have those meticulous coordinators and secretaries, right?
wow,
The secretaries who, keep track, make sure everybody who's supposed to be in attendance is in attendance, and they get massive because, I mean, when we think about it, 4 times a year in all four quadrants internationally and in the United States, every single person in the system who's in those higher levels has to show up for those rituals.
uh-huh,
So, I mean, we're talking billions of dollars at these, 4 times a year that they're getting access to. And who's getting that money? Certainly those of us who go through the ritual, or who have to perform certain jobs there, we don't get diddly
mhm,
squat because, oh, that would break our cover. We can't show our wealth to the world, even though, we're the main stage. you know, that's that's the part that stinks. We're the main stage. We got to do the performance, yet we don't get the financial benefit of that.
mm.
Somebody else does, and who gets that, you know?
Wow. Wow, wow. It is hard to imagine. Seems like a whole different world, what they do.
Yeah, and we wouldn't think about the extent of that,
Mhm.
and yet, like, is that part of how they get away with it by having everything in trust? Trusts are not a direct profit, and by not paying those doing the performance, you know, they can't say that then it's work. Everything is still classified technically as nonprofit,
Wow. Wow.
you know?
Wow. So we were talking beforehand about the initiation, yeah, or the rituals that go along with that, particularly the crucifixion ritual,
Mhm.
and variations on that for different things. It's interesting that they highlight, um, Christianity type of things. Do they are there rituals based on other polytheistic religions, or is it primarily?
No, I think you do see that because you have the dark and the light side who are going to, I guess we'll just for the lack of a better word, we'll say mimic
Mhm,
rituals or things. So, like on the light side, we see, the spear of destiny connected to the Roman soldier who pierced the side of Christ, and the concept that, with that you have the blood of Christ on that spear, which then there's an element of power that
yeah,
supposedly can be invoked that goes with that. Um, so, it's important when we think about these, the two different sides. The other side, you've got the dark side where instead of, I have seen them using that spear of destiny
mhm.
as a sign of power, but you also have along with it the trident that they
Okay.
would use, especially with, in coordination with Atlantis or the underwater cities.
Mhm,
That trident kind of holds the same concept as the spear of destiny. Um, but so you've got the two different things, but as children go through the training in the system with the Order of Melchizedek, you'll see those images or symbols pulled in based on what that child is being trained, what position will they hold, what authority and power comes with that position. So, like for myself, I was trained both on, we'll say, land, water, air, as well as under the earth. Like, there was a all encompassing.
mhm,
So because of that, I experienced many different types of rituals that would pull on that imagery with the spear of destiny.
mhm,
So, in the younger ages for the land, there were 2 different types of rituals. I would say maybe there were even more, but I'll talk distinctly about 2 that I witnessed.
mhm.
The first was in conjunction, with girls where they were testing their virginity, and they actually used that spear to break the hymen.
Yeah.
And, if blood flows out, then they know that girl has remained a virgin. If there isn't blood that appears on the end of the spear, then they know that she's not a virgin, or
Mhm,
so that's the theory. So I witnessed that with some of the abuse of the girls, and, varying ages in that. Um, then you have more of the replications of the crucifixion,
mm,
where, it's some rituals, they're graphically killing people by crucifying them, and they may bring out that imagery, um, to kind of finish the job, and they're gonna have, people that are spearing in that. Um, Then you have others though, like the grand high priest ritual, where they go through the seven sufferings that replicate the seven sufferings of Christ, the
Mhm.
last of those being the crucifixion. So they literally are crucified, and then the test of their power, to enter into that grand high priesthood on the light side is that they have to raise themselves from the dead after all of that. And, they really are wounded. They are speared, through that lung. They have to heal that,
Mhm.
and they have to raise themselves from the dead.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, those are some of the different ones. But then when you get to the water side, you know, that could be used too,
Mhm.
in the waters where, in connection with Atlantis or um, some of the other underground cities where, you have that can be used as a great weapon to, um, because the concept that they teach is that, with the spear of destiny, it was able you had 2 liquids that came out, you had the water and the blood.
Mm.
So in, the water magic, one of the things that, they'll have you do is turn water to blood,
Mm.
and then they equate that then to the parting, you have to part the water. So, that spear can be used to part between the blood and the water after you've done that magic. um, like the Great Sea replica.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, it's
so I've seen it with different things.
yeah.
The sea witches have used it. I've seen that, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the memory that surfaced for me of the crucifixion ritual was connected to the water. We were dealing with cutting off, from my underwater connections and my connection to New Atlantis. And that's, at first, the as the memory was coming, was just seeing my feet and they had holes in them, so I was like, what is this? I didn't, and then began to see the rest, of that, both my brother and I. Um, and my understanding at the time was that it had to do with that Jesus strand, which Veronica doing, my ancestry genealogy confirmed that.
Mhm.
And so are there places that they overlap on some of these? Because it sounds similar to the grand high priest or whatever, where um, to me, the theory is that because you have the DNA of Jesus, then you're going to be healed from anything that happens. And so it's kind of similar to raising yourself from the dead, healing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right in that. That do they use that? In the training, where you're going to experience an extraordinary healing after they've caused damage to your physical body.
Mhm.
Yes, they do use it in that way. um, do they train children, you know or have children go through some of those similar rituals if they're being trained towards grand high priest or priestess positions? That's I think very plausible,
Mhm.
um, that they could do stuff like that, especially if those people are to be in charge of water, the water cities or the others. They have to raise up, the way that it works, like with the underground cities, and this is the similar to the water cities as well, is that each of those water cities, um, and underground cities will have a queen,
Mhm.
who oversees them. That queen will then be supported by 3 wizards, or, sometimes they'll use familiar spirits that are kind of seen as like gods or priests
Mhm.
or prophets who support that queen. And sometimes the queens are hidden, where you don't necessarily see them per se. Some of the imagery that they'll use to teach kids about that hierarchy governance is the Alice in Wonderland books,
Mhm.
where you have the sets of cards the four different suits, and each of those suits you have a king, a queen, a jack. But who holds the power in that? You have the queen,
Mhm.
and then you have the ace, the king, and the jack, all subservient to the queen, representing the three, but
Oh,
yet you have, all four together.
mhm,
So some of that imagery will be used to teach, that governance structure. Um, you also have Wizard of Oz, where you have the four witches.
mhm.
They never outright say Dorothy's the witch of the South, but she's the witch of the South, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end, the power was within her all along. That's what that's what you learn. So, you can have, the way that they build the underground cities and the water cities is that you have that dichotomy of, the four or five women together who hold a seat of power
Mhm,
in that quadrant or area. Um, the same with the top structure of the system. You have the five fold, court of women where, three of those represent the goddess, but you still have that, fivefold cord
mhm.
building that governance structure. So I think it's very similar. Just depends on what specifically in the system people are being trained for is what they experience and learn.
Yeah, and it was like in that the memory with the crucifixion ritual is even like the cross representing that, the upper portion representing the air and the,
Mhm,
arms representing, the earth, and then the rest of the body and legs representing the sea and underground.
mhm,
Um, and um, I don't know if it was, if you had this either or how it works, but it was like the water was my where it was trained that this was my home. This was the safe place, in comparison to some of the other places, being trafficked and so on. But did you have a preference in, that as well, or where one felt
I did.
safer? Okay.
Yep, yep. For me, it was places of fire. Um, yeah, but you have places where it is they give you a safe spot, and maybe that's really given by God. A quiet place where when you can go there, you're safe and nobody can touch you.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do have places like that in the system, and
Yeah, I had to work through with the Lord changing my relationship to water, to make sure that it was clean and it wasn't any reconnecting to anything, in the
mhm,
system, and so that's been a journey, um, for me, and, it was a year or 2 ago where he took me to not every ocean, but, different parts of the
mhm,
United States where I was hitting both coasts, um and the experience on each coast was different in Mexico.
mhm,
There was things to break off at every, point that the Lord
yeah.
took us. So, yeah.
I think that's powerful to do because, how it works is that as you go to different places, they always build an altar there that then, there's a spiritual connection for you in that place. And usually there's some sort of quantum identifier for you that's left in that place, whether, it's your name inscribed on something
Mhm,
or like your numerical value, which could be, your social security code or the full, like a number representing that
mhm,
social security number. It could be like your number within the system based off of one of your other names. It could be, your fingerprints, your footprints. It could be blood or DNA that is left there in that place. Um, but there's something that they'll leave there, and in that there's a contract that's made with every spirit or principality that is connected to that altar, and
Mhm.
it becomes a stronghold or a foothold. So I think, it is valuable. I know too, at, my younger years after I got out, the Lord also had me, looking at a map, looking at the water, um, the different oceans and stuff, and disconnecting myself, saying, Lord, I'm divorcing myself from that. And, as for me and my house, I choose the Lord.
Yeah,
And, Lord, break every altar, break every um, connection, every tie that binds, anything that's connecting me to that. And in that, the enemy steals from us
yeah,
because the Lord created the earth and everything in the earth for our enjoyment.
yes.
It's meant to bring us into that place of worshiping and praising Him.
Mhm.
And what happens is when the enemy takes us to all these places and gives us a traumatic experience in those places, we don't just in our minds connect the trauma to just that place.
Yeah,
We connect the trauma to everything in our memory that connects to that place. So, if your trauma's been through water, all of a sudden now you've got that fear of water. You don't want to go near it. You don't want to be in water. You know, you don't want to be swimming. It could even be that you don't want to be drinking,
mhm,
water or anything, um, depending on what the trauma was. So the enemy tries to steal from us the good things that God has intended for us. And so it's so important to pray and break those and surrender that to the Lord and ask for that restoration so that we can, therefore again enjoy, the goodness the Lord has intended for us in
yeah.
those things.
That's so good, and especially breaking all of that stuff off, and, when I was doing that, the kind of final piece, at least at that time that I knew of, was in the Atlantic, and I was in Florida and, just walking through some stuff on my own with the Lord, and, I did what I felt, he led me to do, um, and I thought it was done, and so I went back to the house, and, um, the next day, my daughter-in-law contacted me and said, "We had this horrible night, and attacks on my granddaughter." And, she was like, "Please pray." And because I knew what I did the day before, it was like, "Oh my, okay." And so I went back down to the water, and, the Lord showed me more things that needed to be fully cut off because of, those contracts and things is,
Mhm.
believing that they were, going after my granddaughter. And so
Yeah.
it was a little
Well, they
hard.
do.
Yeah.
I mean, they do. I've had weird ones like that too. Like, some of the places I went back to, um, like I had already prayed through, had already, walked through anointed, had already asked the Lord to break all contracts with that place, that I was aware of, with the water, with everything else, right? The land, all of that. So then, it's like I'm just trying to enjoy
Mhm,
the place. And they actually at the one place they had a dairy where, they have like their own little ice cream shop and
mhm,
stuff like that. So it's like, what, we're gonna just enjoy. I'm gonna eh, with my friend, I'm gonna enjoy the ice cream.
mhm.
That's gonna be a sign of victory that this place holds no power over me anymore. I'm not fearful, you know. So we have the ice cream that night. All we get is spiritual attacks, and it's like, "How, Lord? Like, we've broke everything, like, where is the attack coming from?" Right? And the Lord tells me that morning, "We gotta go back, and that there's still contracts I gotta break," and it's like, "What contract, Lord?"
Yeah,
Right? It's what it was. They had contracts with the milk. They offered the milk to Artemis, and and would offer. So the Lord brought all that back, and I was like, okay, so back I go to deal with the milk contracts.
Wow.
So it's interesting because both, like, you've got the milk, you've got the wine, you have the honey is another contract that a lot of the priestesses of Melissa will be involved with the contracts with the honey and the bees. Um, all those things that biblically, we think are, they're meant
Yeah.
to be blessings, but they'll do contracts with those things, and then we don't even think about it. The produce of the land, the
Mhm.
flocks, the cattle of the land, which that even then gets into like the material, like the yarn, the wool. Um, they do separate contracts with all those things, even with the waterways, the fish, you know, they'll do different things with the fish, the plant life in there, all those different types of things. But
Wow.
not to overwhelm people, we
Yeah.
just have to trust that the Lord shows us when it's His time,
Yes.
if there's things that need to be broken off as we work through our healing.
Yeah. And it was interesting for me, some of the things that I had to, that came to mind was regalia. Um,
Mm,
and so I was evidently fairly high up in the royalty of under the sea. And,
right?
I that was kind of I think that was the secondary thing that, I wasn't aware of that I needed to do was to
Hmm.
renounce and to release all regalia, um,
Hmm.
to the Lord. So, yeah.
Yep, all connection to what they consider royalty and
Mhm.
privilege, honor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I encourage people with that too. Like, how I did that was simply just in prayer, laying everything at the Lord's feet. All rights, all authorities, all powers, everything that I was privileged or privy to. It was like, Lord, I submit all this and lay it at your feet. Not my will, but thine. And, I proclaim this day that you are my Lord and
Yeah.
my God. And I give everything to your lordship and to your will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so important to keep that in view because sometimes when we talk about these things, it can be so overwhelming and it can feel like, they control our lives and, all of this and that. And, but God is bigger and greater and He has a way through. And
Yeah.
so, not to be discouraged about some of this stuff, but we get to overcome.
We do. Yeah. So what are some ways, like as you're working through that, um, what are some ways that the Lord reveals to you the things that you have to work on? Like, how do you usually receive that, or how does that usually come? Do you have to be present at that place, or does some of it come up through just memories, um, things you see or hear?
There's a lot of different ways, which I think is so beautiful the way the Lord does things. It's sometimes it is being there.
Mhm,
And so I was sharing earlier with you that I, a couple weeks ago, went back to my boarding school, which is where I got sick. And, it's one of those things where a friend of mine was asking, well, what was there that all of a sudden you went from being an active teenager to being bedridden, for
mhm,
a number of years? And, at first it was like nothing. It was just like, bam.
mhm,
Um, and so being on the land, um, and then about almost a week later, um, the Lord was reminding me things, and it was like, oh, the time of year that I got sick was Halloween, around Halloween. Huh,
mhm.
can't be a coincidence,
No.
And and then he started gently just nudging this, you know, was it possible that, I had a baby at that time at the boarding school?
Mm,
And, I at that up to that point, I didn't have any memories of any other children besides the one I've been conscious of, although I
mhm.
knew there was a possibility, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and so then I just began to do some journaling with the Lord, and it came forward, yes.
Mm,
Um, and the interesting thing too is the interaction with our physical body as well. Is that the day after I um, went to the boarding school, I started getting pain in my legs like I did that caused me to be
mhm.
bedridden. And,
Hmm.
there was, some fear involved in that, like, "Oh, no, what's going on?" But I knew that there was
Yeah.
spiritual components and emotional components to it.
Mhm.
And so, I was able to work through with the counselor I work with, and able to get out some of that emotion and cry and grieve. Now, I think I've got some more to go in processing that
Mhm.
memory, but just with that grieving, the majority of the pain in my legs went away, you know?
Mhm.
And so it's like our body speaks to us, God speaks to us, memories
Mhm.
surface, and this is where we trust the Lord, is that He He knows this journey and He knows what we can handle. And for me, it's been this gradual resurfacing of things in
Mhm.
ways that I don't expect. Getting my genealogy done with Veronica was just a
Mhm.
thought that popped in. Hey, I could ask her if she would do that, and it
Right.
confirmed some memories and brought up some other things. And so having to really trust the Lord with my life and with,
Mhm.
what he surfaces. And, sometimes I get so impatient with the process and go, I just want to be done. I just want it to be all over.
I get there too. Yep.
Um, and yet the Lord just gently is like, it's okay. I've got this. I have a plan. Are you willing to trust me?
Mhm.
And so both that he knows our frame, he knows what we can handle. And there's connections, in other things. And, we've talked briefly about this before, is that, I think you have talked about some things you did around 2018,
Mhm.
that I know several survivors, including myself, who that's about the time that memory started surfacing,
Mhm.
and so there is a connection that we have,
Yeah.
and the Lord knows timing and place where in our own process things are released, but it also impacts other people
Yeah.
on the
I think
journey.
so too. Yeah.
Yeah. So step by step,
Yeah.
we're overcoming.
That's right. We all get through just one day at a time, one moment at a time,
Yeah.
one piece at a time.
And that's over and over, they'll be like, or I'll get to a place of like, I don't think I could do any more of this. This is too hard. I want
I've
to be
been in
done.
that place several times in my life.
Yeah, it's like
I'm done, Lord. Actually, mine's usually, Lord, I'm done. I'm done. If you bring it up, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm done. I'm going to shove that sucker back down and
yes. And that kind of goes along with what I was originally thinking about talking about today, was just the question of why do we do what we're doing now? Why do we talk about this? Why do we make it public? Because it certainly is not fun. Um, and
yeah.
we get harassed and people go, oh, they're just trying to exalt the occult and all this other kind of garbage. But why do you do this, Jesse?
You know, I I don't think that there's anything I can do but obey the Lord.
Yeah.
And, really everything that I've experienced and that's happened to me is part of that testimony and witness that He's given. And each of us have that. Um, the way that the Lord works in His kingdom is that, as we receive, as we receive healing for certain things, that healing isn't just for us. Really it's a gift that, as you said, you know, what happens to us impacts other people as well.
Mhm.
The majority of us were not in situations where, we were the only child or the only person involved in our situations and events. Um, the majority of the things we experienced included others.
Yeah.
So, what is the Lord wanting? What work is He wanting to do? So, for me, it's, an act of pure obedience and worship, that if I've really given Him lordship of my life, that means that I have to walk under that lordship. I have to allow Him to say, here's where you're going to go. And the hardest place to go at times is down that road of suffering with Him. Many don't want to walk down that road of suffering. Yet, we know in scripture it says that suffering, there's a time and a season for it. At the end of the day, what suffering leads to is the release of joy.
Yes.
So, how can we have that release of joy if we don't go through those periods of suffering?
Mhm.
You know, so, I can't say that I'm always willing in that. The Lord knows I wrestle. Majority of the time, I'm not willing, but, He also knows my heart, that above everything else, I do desire to be obedient and to show Him my love for Him in that obedience,
Yeah.
you know?
Totally, and it's almost laughable, when the harassers come and they're like, you're just trying to exalt this and you're trying to get attention and, all these different kinds of things, and it's like, I don't think any one of us, you know, um, want to talk about this or go public or any of those things. Um,
The truth is, like, as the complications of bringing this information forward
mhm,
is that, literally every time we break that code of silence, we're declaring an act of war in the spirit world,
yeah,
which means that we're going to get attacked on every front, not only in the spiritual, but in the physical as well.
mhm,
And who wants to do that? There's not a single one of us that want that. And, yet here it is. And, you know, at the end of the day, the truth has to come forward.
yeah,
The Lord says in the last days that He will expose the wickedness. He will lay it bare,
mm,
right? He literally says, I will lift up, your skirts and show your nakedness to the world. That's what He told Israel, right? That He would reveal everything, both in regards to sin and to the evil, the wickedness.
mhm,
And, that's part of it, is that, those of us who've gone through that system, that's part of the, as we come out with our testimonies, that's that exposure of the system.
yeah,
And, it's just, it can't remain silent or hidden, because
yeah.
God says He'll lay it bare, you know?
Which I'm so grateful, and I am looking forward to the day when the fullness of that does happen.
Yeah,
Because in the midst of a lot of harassment and different things, on different levels, it can be tough where there's accusations and, all different kinds of stuff. Um, but knowing that there will be a day when everything will be made plain. Um,
yeah,
those who us called us crazy or whatever, will understand the truth,
yeah.
and we'll be able to see the fullness of the truth as well, and so I'm grateful for who the Lord is and that He is the one who triumphs, and we get to put our trust in Him, you know,
Mhm.
so
Absolutely.
it's not it's not an easy thing, and we're not here to glorify evil, we're here to glorify the Lord, and that's, I know, both of our hearts, as we walk this out,
Yeah.
so
And as people listen, they hear that, they hear that we are glorifying the Lord,
yeah,
and, His name is exalted and all of that, you know? And those who don't hear that, they're just not listening,
yes, yes.
you know?
It's so good, so good. And I want to encourage people. I haven't done as many other people besides Jessie and Veronica lately, and that's because um, I work full time and don't have time to try to get people's testimony. But I'd
Yeah.
love to have more people's testimony because I do believe this is where we break the power of the enemy when we do come
Mhm.
forward. And when we exalt the Lord, it has an impact on others. And so just want to encourage you to contact me and we can talk. And, it doesn't have to be a full hour testimony, but
Yeah.
just, the simplicity of what God's doing, in your life. And we should have testimony every week of, the goodness of God and what, he's doing and what we're overcoming. And so,
Mhm.
that is what gives us courage to continue on. Um,
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to start another transformation group, June 18, for those of you who are interested. Um, and that's really what I love about the groups, is in the midst of us, somebody's having a great day and has a victory and, a testimony to share and others might be struggling. But when we come together as a community, we all leave encouraged and edified and
Mhm.
blessed and strengthened on our journey. And, this week it might be me having the praise report and you might be struggling and next week it might be the opposite,
Vice versa, right?
And, there's something so beautiful when we can just be ourselves and we don't have to hide anymore. Um, I did, at least the way I grew up in the system,
Mhm.
that presentation whole thing was so strong in my life. But, just being able to
Yeah.
learn to be me has changed my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have, coming up too, I really encourage people to get involved in different opportunities.
Mhm.
There's a lot of survivors who are out there speaking forth and um, trying to open the door for others to come forward and
Mhm.
stuff. I know on my end, I've been doing a lot of the trainings on the decoding in the
Mhm.
different areas. I've been working with some of the leadership in the churches in Chicago area. So, put on your schedule if you guys are available in September. We'll probably have a live event there in Chicago in September that people can attend. Almost time for the main event, which is June 13th through the 15th.
Awesome.
You can still purchase and register for tickets for that. Join us up in Maine, and that event is called the Joy Set Before Us, and we're going to get into kind of that deeper area of prayer, but it also deals with the kingdom currencies and how um, accounting works in the Lord's kingdom, and how do we begin to access the resources that we have in his kingdom, the things that are that he's created or that he's given us an abundant supply of, you know.
That is awesome, awesome. I wish I could go. I've been wanting to get up to Maine one of these days, so maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
I'll be up there again.
Yes, yes. That is awesome. Well, anything else you wanna dive into today or
I think that was it. I think that was a great discussion, a little bit
Yeah,
heavier one. I think for people listening, maybe
yeah,
if any of that resonated with others who may have gone through some of those things or experienced some of those things.
yeah. And just encouragement that there's hope, on the journey and you're not alone. And, there's so many things that tend to divide, um, survivors, and there's reason for that. But it always grieves my heart because I believe that, when we can come together and, there's so much that the Lord can do when we join
Mhm.
forces instead of being divided. And so, I'm looking forward to the day when, there's more unity, in the survivor community,
Yeah.
because I know that's the Lord's heart. And so, one of these days.
One of these days.
Yeah.
Might be
So,
when hell freezes over and Jesus comes back, but hey,
yep.
That was a total joke, but anyway.
And I think that we can work towards, that coming together just in our hearts of, being gentle with one another, even where people choose to walk away or, those kinds of things, is just having
Mhm.
grace um, for each other's journey because we're all on a journey and it's not easy. So, all right. Thank you
Very
so
good.
much, Jessie.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being on with us today. Encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. And just keep the message going that there is hope and there is victory in Jesus. So we'll see you next time on Testimony Mountain.